What would you do if one night your world changed forever? What if you woke up on a ship in the middle of the ocean, trapped inside a storm that shook the sky and tore apart everything you knew? I remember that night clearly because it was the beginning of our story. It was the night when my family and I lost our old life and began a new one far from the world we once knew. The storm had raged for days. The waves were taller than houses, and the wind screamed like 1,000 angry voices. Our ship was old and heavy, but even it shook and bent under the force of the sea. My husband had once been a fisherman, but even he looked afraid. I held my 3 children close, praying that the wood around us would not break. My oldest daughter, Lucia, was 15 and tried to stay calm. My son Matteo was 12 and wanted to be brave, but I saw his lips tremble. My youngest, little Rosa, was only 7, and she cried softly into my arms. Before I continue, I would love to know if you were in a storm like this, would you try to fight the sea or wait quietly for your fate? Share your thoughts in the comments. At last, when I thought we would sink, a sailor shouted from above, "Land! I see land!" His voice cut through the storm like a knife. My children looked up with wide eyes. Land meant hope, but the hope lasted only a moment. With a deafening sound, the ship hit rocks hidden beneath the waves. The floor shook, and wood cracked around us. People screamed as the sailors lowered boats into the water, desperate to escape. In the confusion, we found ourselves alone. Most of the crew had already fled. We had no small boat left for us. I told my children not to fear. The front of the ship had lodged between 2 large rocks, and part of it still stood above the water. "If we survive the night," I whispered, "we will find a way to reach the land." My children clung to my words. I knew they were not enough, but sometimes hope is the only thing you can give. That night, we did not sleep. My husband and I stayed awake, listening to the storm and praying that the sea would not swallow us whole. By morning, the wind was softer and the waves were calmer. The island was there before us, green and strange, a promise of survival. But between us and that land lay the deep, wild sea. We began to search the ship for anything that might help. Lucia returned first, carrying a bundle of dry clothes and some rope. Matteo, stronger than his years, found a wooden chest full of tools, hammers, nails, and sharp knives. Rosa, too small to carry heavy things, brought only a basket with a few candles she had discovered. My husband returned smiling, pulling 2 old fishing spears and a coil of rope. As for me, I went down to the lower deck and found a small barrel of fresh water. It was heavy, but I dragged it back with all my strength. Then, while searching in a corner, Matteo shouted, "Mother, come quickly!" I hurried to him and found him face to face with a large bird trapped in a broken cage. It was a parrot, its feathers green and red. At first, I thought it would attack, but instead it tilted its head and looked at us as if asking for help. Rosa begged us to free it. I hesitated, but at last I opened the cage. The parrot flew up, then landed on Rosa's shoulder. From that moment, it stayed with us. My children named it Soul, because in that dark time, it felt like a little piece of the sun had come to us. We needed a way to reach the shore. My husband had an idea. We found large, empty barrels and tied them together with rope, then placed planks of wood across them. It looked weak, but it could float. Slowly, we built a kind of raft. It was not beautiful, but it was our only chance. That evening, we decided not to leave yet. The light was fading, and the sea was still dangerous. We tied the raft with rope to the ship and waited for morning. My children were restless, but we gave them some bread and water and tried to comfort them. The parrot squawked loudly, and strangely, its voice gave us courage. At dawn, the sea was calmer. We worked quickly, moving what we could onto the raft: food, tools, water, and blankets. My husband took the spear, and I carried Rosa. Lucia and Matteo pushed against the wood until the raft slid into the water. It rocked dangerously, but it held. With long poles from the ship, we pushed ourselves forward, following the parrot that flew ahead as if guiding us. The water was colder than I had imagined. At one moment, a wave pushed against us, and Rosa cried out. I held her tightly and whispered that we were safe. We moved slowly, every push taking us closer to the beach. Then suddenly Matteo shouted, "Look!" Ahead of us, through the morning light, we saw the line of sand. Palm trees rose tall, and birds circled above them. The sight filled us with new energy. When we reached the shallows, Lucia jumped into the water to steady the raft. Matteo followed, then I helped Rosa step onto the sand. I cannot describe the feeling of my feet touching solid ground. We had survived the storm, and we had survived the sea. We were alive, but survival was only the first step. Before us lay an island unknown to us. We did not know if it was safe, if there were wild animals or hidden dangers. The sun was hot, and the air was heavy with the smell of plants and salt. My children looked at me, waiting for guidance. I tried to smile. We are here now, I told them, and we must make this place our home. Matteo was the first to explore. He ran toward the trees, calling that he had found coconuts. Rosa followed with the parrot on her shoulder. Lucia stayed by me, serious and thoughtful. She said, "Mother, we must build a shelter before night comes." She was right. The storm might return, and we needed safety. We used the sailcloth we had taken from the ship to make a tent. Matteo brought dry leaves for bedding, and Rosa gathered small sticks for fire. With stones, we built a circle on the ground, and with much effort, we lit our first flame. As the smoke rose, I felt a strange peace. For the first time since the storm began, we were safe, even if only for one night. That evening, we shared a simple meal of bread, coconut, and water. The parrot's soul squawked, as if sharing our joy. My children laughed, and for a moment, the island felt less frightening. But as the sun went down, I looked toward the sea and thought of the broken ship still resting on the rocks. I knew we would need to return for more supplies. The island might feed us, but we could not survive on coconuts and hope alone. When the stars appeared above us, Rosa fell asleep quickly. Matteo and Lucia whispered about what animals might live in the jungle. I lay awake, listening to the waves. My heart was heavy, but also proud. We had lost everything, but we had not lost each other, and as long as we were together, perhaps we could survive. The first night on the island passed slowly. I slept in pieces, always waking when the fire grew weak or when strange cries came from the jungle. My children slept close to me, and I kept one hand on Rosa's shoulder. At last the sky grew lighter, and the first rays of morning sun came through the palm trees. I felt both relief and fear. We had survived one night, but now the real test of our lives on this lost island was only beginning. After a simple breakfast of coconuts, my husband said we must return to the ship. There were still many useful things on board, and if another storm came, the sea could break the ship apart and carry everything away. I agreed, but we could not all go. Someone had to stay with Rosa, so I stayed with her, while he took Lucia and Matteo back across the water on the raft. I stood on the beach with Rosa, watching them move farther away. My heart beat fast until they were only small figures against the broken ship. To keep Rosa busy, I asked her to collect shells from the sand. She walked along the shore with Sol the parrot on her shoulder, calling out whenever she found a shell she liked. I watched the jungle carefully. I knew nothing about the animals that lived there, and every sound made me uneasy. At one moment, I thought I saw movement in the trees, but when I looked harder, there was nothing. Hours passed before I saw the raft again. Rosa jumped up and down, waving her small hands. When they came close, I saw the raft heavy with barrels, wooden planks, and cloth. Lucia shouted with joy, and Matteo pointed proudly to the 2 goats that stood tied at the front of the raft. My husband had managed to rescue them from the ship's lower deck. They would give us milk, and later perhaps young ones. I could not believe our good fortune. That night, we cooked a meal of rice and dried fish from the ship's stores. It was not much, but it filled our stomachs. For plates, Lucia cut coconuts in half, and for spoons we used shells. My children laughed at the strange meal, but I told them it was a king's feast because it kept us alive. After we ate, we fed the goats with dry grass, then tied them close to our tent. The sound of their chewing was strangely comforting. The next day, we all went back to the ship. This time I went too, because I wanted to see what else we could save. The sea was calm, and we reached the ship without trouble. Inside Busoy, the air was heavy and smelled of wet wood, but treasures were hidden everywhere. In one corner, I found a chest full of seeds, corn, beans, and something that looked like cassava roots. I knew these could mean survival in the months ahead. Matteo found a box of nails and hammers, and Lucia carried cloth and rope. My husband discovered a barrel of flour, though it was heavy and hard to move. We worked until the sun began to fall, then loaded the raft again. The goats bleated as we pushed away from the ship, as if afraid of leaving it behind. When we reached the beach, Rosa ran to meet us, her arms full of flowers she had picked. I hugged her tightly, thankful she was safe. Days turned into weeks. We returned many times to the ship, each time bringing back something useful. More tools, a small barrel of oil, fishing lines, and even an old lantern. But little by little, the sea ate the ship away, until one morning we saw it had broken apart completely. I stood in silence, staring at the waves carrying the last pieces of wood away. That ship had carried us across the world. It had carried our old life. Now it was gone, and the island was truly our only home. With the supplies we had saved, we began to think of a stronger shelter. The tent was fine for a few nights, but it could not protect us from heavy rain or wild animals. One afternoon, Matteo shouted from the jungle, "Mother, come quickly!" I hurried to him and found a circle of giant trees with wide, strong roots. Between them was clear ground, safe and open. My husband studied the place and said, "This is where we will build our home." At first, we built simple huts using planks from the ship and palm leaves from the trees. The work was hard under the hot sun, and we sweated until our clothes were soaked. But little by little, the swells began to rise, and a roof gave us shade. We built one hut for sleeping, another for food storage, and a small pen for the goats. Rosa decorated the walls with seashells, saying it made the huts look like fairy houses. Her laughter gave us strength when our arms grew tired. One morning, Lucia and I went to the river that flowed near the trees. We filled pots with fresh water and washed our clothes on the rocks. As we worked, Lucia looked thoughtful. "Mother," she said, "do you think anyone will ever find us?" Her voice was soft, but I heard the worry in it. I wanted to promise her yes, but I could not lie. "I do not know," I said, "but until then, we must live as if this island is our world." She nodded, and I saw in her eyes that she was no longer a child, but becoming a young woman. Soon after we met our first danger, Mateo had gone deeper into the jungle, searching for fruit. Suddenly, we heard his cry. My husband ran toward the sound with his spear, and I followed with fear in my chest. We found him standing still, his eyes wide, while a wild boar stood before him. The animal was large, with sharp tusks and angry eyes. It pawed the ground, ready to attack. My husband raised the spear and moved slowly. Then, with one sharp throw, he struck the boar. It fell with a cry, then lay still. Mateo shook with fear, and I held him tightly. "You must not go so far alone," I told him. "The jungle is not a friend we know yet." That evening, we cooked the meat of the boar. It was tough, but it fed us for many days. I knew, however, that the island also had teeth, and we would need to be careful. In time, we began to explore more. We found banana trees, sweet fruit that gave us joy after so many days of dry bread. We found wild roots that tasted like potatoes when roasted. Rosa discovered a small cave near the cliffs, and inside we saw white crystals on the walls. My husband tasted one carefully and said it was salt. That day we danced with joy, because salt meant we could preserve meat for the future. The months passed. The island began to feel less like a prison and more like a strange new world. The parrot soul learned to speak small words, copying Rosa's laughter. The goats gave us milk, and from their milk, Lucia tried to make a kind of soft cheese. Mateo grew stronger and learned to fish with the spear. At night, we sat around the fire, telling stories of our old home, though those memories slowly felt like dreams. Yet even in our small happiness, I felt the weight of fear. Storms still came, shaking our huts and flooding the ground. The jungle was full of sounds we did not understand, and sometimes, on quiet nights, I stood on the beach and stared at the endless sea. Was there another ship out there, one that could see our fire and bring us home? Or were we now part of the island forever? As the first year began to turn, I realized that survival was not enough. We could not only live day by day, we needed to build a future. And so I told my children one morning, "We must make this island our garden. We must plant the seeds we saved and raise animals. If rescue comes one day, we will be ready, but if it never comes, we must still live full lives." And so began our true work, not only surviving the island, but making it ours. The island gave us food and water, but it also gave us new fears. As the months passed, we learned that life there was never quiet for long. The weather could turn from bright sun to heavy rain in minutes. The jungle was full of voices, and many of them did not belong to friendly creatures. But the greatest challenge was not the storms or the animals. It was learning to live without the world we had lost. One day, Mateo and Lucia went together to gather fruit. They followed a path deeper into the jungle than before. When they returned, their faces were pale. "Mother," Lucia said, "we saw smoke." I stood still. For months we had seen no sign of other people. "Are you certain?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes, It rose from behind the cliffs near the north side of the island. That night we spoke long about it. My husband thought perhaps it was a fire caused by lightning, but Matteo insisted it looked like a campfire. Rosa was frightened and asked if bad men lived there. I told her we did not know, but that we must be careful. Part of me wanted to see who else lived on this land. Another part feared what we might find. The next morning, my husband and Matteo went to look. They carried spears and a rope, while Sol the parrot stayed close to Rosa. Hours later, they returned without news. We found no fire, my husband said. Only black stones that showed a fire had been there. Whoever made it is gone now. His words did not comfort me. If someone else lived here, then we were not as alone as we thought. Life went on, but the thought of others on the island stayed in my mind. I watched the jungle more carefully, and at night I listened for footsteps beyond the sound of the waves. We never saw more smoke, but the fear never left. To keep our minds busy, we worked harder on the land. We cleared a wide space near the river and planted seeds from the chest we had saved. Corn, beans, and cassava began to grow in neat lines. Lucia watered the plants each morning, while Matteo built a fence of wood and rope to keep animals away. Rosa sang to the plants, saying they would grow faster if they heard her voice. I laughed at her words, but secretly I wished it could be true. One evening, a storm came without warning. The wind roared and the rain beat hard against our huts. We ran to the shelter of the strongest one and held each other as water poured through holes in the roof. The goats cried loudly and Sol screeched in fear. I feared the storm would carry everything away. By morning, the ground was flooded and many of our things were wet. Our food was safe, but the fence around the garden had fallen. For days we worked to rebuild, our hands sore and our bodies tired. It was after this storm that something unexpected happened. Matteo went again into the jungle to find wood. He returned with eyes shining. "Mother," he cried, "I found a cave." At first I did not want to hear. The jungle had already given us enough dangers, but when he showed us the place the next day, I felt a strange hope. The cave was high in the cliffs, hidden behind thick plants. Inside, the air was cool and dry. The walls shone with white crystals that glittered in the light. My husband touched them and said they were salt. We shouted with joy. Salt meant safety. We could keep meat for many months, and we would not suffer in the rainy season as we had feared. We decided to make the cave part of our home. We carried pots, wood, and tools up the path and built a fire inside. The smoke rose through a crack in the ceiling, leaving the air clear. For the first time since the ship sank, I felt truly safe. A cave could not blow away in the wind or fall under rain. The jungle still surrounded us, but the walls gave us strength. We began to live between two places, the huts near the river, where the goats and garden stayed, and the cave in the cliffs, where we slept and cooked. It was hard work to move between them, but we grew used to it. Rosa said we were like birds with two nests. One morning, while we worked in the garden, Rosa came running with Sol on her shoulder. "Come, come," she cried. We followed her to the beach, and there we saw something that made our hearts beat faster. A piece of wood lay on the sand. It was smooth, shaped by human hands, and carried by the sea. It was not from our old ship. We looked at one another in silence. If there were people on another island nearby, perhaps they had lost a ship too, or perhaps they were dangerous. We did not know. That night, we lit a large fire on the beach, hoping that if friendly people saw it, they would answer. But no answer came, only the sound of the waves. As weeks passed, our small world grew larger. We learned which fruits were safe and which were bitter. We learned where to fish and how to dry meat in the sun. Mateo made a bow and arrows from strong wood, and soon he was hunting birds without using the precious gunpowder. Lucia made baskets from palm leaves, and Rosa collected bright shells to hang at the entrance of the cave. Even Sol the parrot became part of our life, calling out words and warning us when strangers' sounds came from the jungle. Still, my heart ached when I thought of the world beyond the sea. I often asked myself if rescue would ever come. Would my children grow into adults on this island, never seeing another town or another face? Would Rosa remember anything of her old life, or would the island become her only memory? One evening, as the sun set red over the water, I asked my husband if he believed we would ever leave. He looked at me for a long time, then he said, "Perhaps we will. Perhaps we will not. But we must not live each day waiting for rescue. We must live as if this island is our home forever. That way, if a ship comes, it will be a gift. And if it does not, we will still have lived a full life." His words stayed with me. Seasons changed. The rains came again, but this time we were ready. The cave protected us, and the garden gave us food. The goats gave milk, and from their milk we made butter and a kind of soft cheese. Our days were full of work, but also of laughter. Rosa learned to swim in the river, and Mateo climbed tall trees to bring down coconuts. Lucia wrote notes in charcoal on flat stones, keeping a record of our days. She said one day someone might find them and know our story. Then, one morning, a cry rose from the beach. It was Mateo. "Mother, come quickly," he shouted. I ran to him, my heart racing. He pointed to the horizon. There, far away but clear, was the shape of a ship. For a moment, the world stopped. We all stood in silence, hardly daring to believe. We built a great fire and fed it with dry leaves, so the smoke rose high into the sky. We waved cloth and shouted until our throats were sore. The ship seemed to turn, as if looking toward us, but then, after a long time, it moved on, slowly disappearing into the distance. Rosa cried, and even Lucia turned away with tears in her eyes. My husband put his arm around me, and I felt his strength. "Do not lose hope," he whispered. "If one ship has passed, another will come." That night, I sat at the cave entrance, watching the dark sea. I thought of the people on that ship, so close to us and yet so far. Perhaps they never saw our fire. Perhaps they thought the island empty. But I also thought of my children sleeping behind me, safe and warm. The island had tested us, but it had also given us strength we never knew we had. I do not know if rescue will ever come, but I know this. We survived the storm, we survived the sea, and we survived the lost island. And as long as we are together, there is nothing we cannot face. Thank you for listening to the end. If this story touched you, please subscribe, share it with a friend, and tell me in the comments you tried to survive on a lost island or wait for rescue.